The Metal Gear series is one of the greatest video game series of all time. Almost every single one of the games is critically acclaimed. It changed the genre, it changed gaming as a whole. However, not every game is created equal. So, I'm Eggboy. I want to make a tier list of every single Metal Gear game ever. Before I start, I need to do one thing. Let's begin. So, since I'm doing this chronologically, we're going to start with the first Metal Gear. The first Metal Gear is a really interesting game because it kind of just invented the entire stealth genre. Obviously, there were games before that were kind of like stealth, but Metal Gear defined the entire stealth genre. However, it doesn't really have a lot of what makes Metal Gear today. The story is pretty basic. It's just almost entirely an action movie ripoff. And the gameplay is extremely simple, especially comparing Metal Gear 2, which only came out like 3 years later. But, I mean, considering that it defined the entire series, it's still, you know, a monumental game. But as a game itself, I'm definitely giving it a C. Next is Metal Gear Snake's Revenge, which you might need a little backstory for. Metal Gear Snake's Revenge was the original Konami sequel to Metal Gear 1. On the MSX. However, it was released only for the NES and it was geared towards Westerners. It had no involvement of Hideo Kojima, which is why the story sucks and the game sucks. It's poorly designed, the AI is terrible, there's almost no story. It's just a really terrible game and everyone knows that, so I'm putting that right in F. Next is Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake. This has held up incredibly well for a game that was released on a console that was dead on release, and in 1990. This was the one that really defined what made Metal Gear's story so popular, which was how insane and completely impossible to understand. It just really doesn't make any sense at all, which is what makes Metal Gear so great. Also, the gameplay is really good. Surprisingly, even though it's built off of Metal Gear 1, it's much better in almost every way. And it highly influences Metal Gear Solid, which obviously is an amazing game. Spoilers. But Metal Gear 2 is probably an A, because it's just a fantastic game, especially considering the standards of the time in 1990. It just blows everything out of the water. Next is Metal Gear Solid, released on the PS1. I feel like I don't need to say a lot about this. Metal Gear Solid is one of the greatest games ever released. The story is fantastic, the gameplay is fantastic, the map design is phenomenal and unforgettable. It was the real start for the Metal Gear series. I know that I said Metal Gear 2 basically started the whole story, but Metal Gear Solid legitimately started the series. Without Metal Gear Solid, we would not have anything of Metal Gear related today. I mean, every single Metal Gear game after this, other than the spin-offs, is named after this one. It's Metal Gear Solid now, it's not Metal Gear anymore. So, obviously, Metal Gear Solid is an S-tier game. Next is VR missions. This was packed in with Metal Gear Solid. It's not really a standalone game, and it was never intended to be. That's why it kind of has no depth, but it takes the VR missions from the main game and puts them into its own game. It has like 300 levels or something of you just doing stealth. It doesn't have a story, other than the fact that you're a soldier and you're doing VR missions, obviously. The gameplay is just based on Metal Gear Solid, so it's not really unique. But obviously it's a lot of fun, and all the levels are well designed, so I'm giving it a B. Metal Gear Ghost Babel. Ghost Babel is a very interesting game because, in the West it was released as Metal Gear Solid, but it's just a Game Boy game, so obviously it's not Metal Gear Solid. And the story is also pretty different. It's almost an entirely new game. It doesn't have the involvement of Hideo Kojima. However, as you'll come to see, without the involvement of Hideo Kojima, especially after this game, shit gets wacky very quickly. And Ghost Babel is a very good example of that. It's a really fun game. It's obviously restricted by the hardware, but for the hardware itself, Metal Gear Ghost Babel it's crazy that they were able to make this game and make it such a faithful Metal Gear Solid game on a handheld that is about as powerful as a fucking toaster. So I'm giving that a B. Above VR missions, probably. Next is Metal Gear Solid 2. This is... if you said that this was the greatest Metal Gear Solid game and the greatest game of all time, I would say that's totally fair. It takes everything that Metal Gear Solid created in 1997 and builds on it in a way that no other sequel has since. It is the greatest sequel ever. It is one of the greatest games ever. It made a lot of people angry when it was released, obviously because of the inclusion of Raiden, who replaces Solid Snake after he fucking an hour into the game. But I mean, now that we have the hindsight of that and we know We also know more about the story, and we can analyze it better now that we have, we know more about the Metal Gear Solid series and the development of it. It's really a phenomenal game, and the theming, I think, is the best out of any of the series. It's all based on trying to recreate Solid Snake using some guy. Well, it's not some guy, it's a soldier, but it's really just a phenomenal game in every single way. So I'm giving that S tier right above Metal Gear Solid because I think it's better than Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid is great in its own way, but Metal Gear Solid 2 it's something else. It's really something else. Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. So Twin Snakes is a remake of Metal Gear Solid on the PS1, except it was released on GameCube and it's built off of the Metal Gear Solid 2 engine. I think it's a pretty divisive game when it comes to the Metal Gear Solid fandom. Some people like it, some don't, but it really makes the game a lot easier because of first-person mode and how much better the controls are in Metal Gear Solid 2. But the thing is, the reason it's so much easier is because they didn't change the map at all. So you're doing all these things that were intended to be played using a certain control scheme with a much better control scheme, a much easier control scheme. So it's way easier. Also, the cutscenes are way over the top. Metal Gear Solid felt more grounded. Obviously, it's not a grounded game at all. There's fucking... everything is bonkers in that game, but Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes is even more bonkers. And I'm a fan of it. Some people aren't, but I would say it's pretty good. Because of how much easier it makes it and how much it dumbs down a lot of the stuff because of the control scheme, I'm gonna give it a C. But it's above the original Metal Gear, by far. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is the greatest game ever made after Fallout New Vegas. But it really is a phenomenal, outstanding game. If you've never played Metal Gear Solid 3, you absolutely need to play it right now. Stop watching and play that fucking game right now. I really think there's nothing like it. I know I've said that about all the good Metal Gear Solid games, but it's something else. The story is the greatest in the series. The characters are outstanding. The design of the game, there's so much you can do with every single encounter that you have in Metal Gear Solid 3. There's no one answer to anything. Despite the fact that it's a linear game, every encounter and every point in the story, you can take it from a different perspective. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't played it, but you need to play it. You absolutely have to play it if you haven't. It's one of the greatest games ever made. It's above Metal Gear Solid 2, it's above Metal Gear Solid, it's above the entire rest of the series. There's nothing else that will ever reach the peak that is Metal Gear Solid 3. It's just such a good game. Next is the 2 Metal Gear Acid games. This will definitely require explaining. Metal Gear Acid is a Metal Gear Solid spin-off that is a tactical RPG based on card games. You get cards based on different things from the series, like a box or the USPS, and it's definitely a different game. Obviously, if you try to look past the fact that it's a Metal Gear game and just enjoy it like as a card game with some Metal Gear elements in, it's definitely fun. It's hard to adjust to, but it's a definitely fun game. I'd give it a B. Well, I'll give, and the second one is slightly above. Not for any particular reason, I just enjoyed it more, but they're both pretty equal. Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops is not a canon game in the Metal Gear series. A lot of these games are not canon, but this one is important to point out because of how story heavy it is. It's a fun game, and I'm definitely a fan of it. It's another one of those divisive games that not everyone likes, but I'd say it's a pretty fun game. It's super restricted by the hardware. Peace Walker, which was also released on the same console, got a remaster with the HD collection. Portable Ops did not. So if you're trying to play it today, you're gonna have to, adjust to it pretty heavily. It's a hard game to play, and it's definitely Metal Gear. It's Metal Gear on a portable, which is something commendable that they created. But compared to the rest of the series, it's pretty bland and like boring. I wouldn't say it's a fantastic game, but it's a good game for sure. So I'm giving that a C. It's below the original and Twin Snakes probably. Okay. This is probably the most controversial decision that I make in this video. Metal Gear Solid 4 is a very strange game. Hideo Kojima intended to end the series with Metal Gear Solid 3. However, obviously because he was working under Konami, which is the worst company ever, they forced him to make new games because fans wanted new games. And they wanted the conclusion of Solid Snake's story after Metal Gear Solid 2, and Raiden's story, and everyone's story. There was a lot of threads purposefully left open with the story, but obviously because of the fans, he was forced to conclude things that give answers to things that were never meant to have answers, like about the Patriots and characters from Metal Gear Solid 3 that we never saw in the original series, and all this stuff that really did not need to be finished. But the best thing about it, I'd say, is the gameplay. It controls probably second best out of well, no, not second best. It controls pretty well out of the whole series. But the story is just like, the story is so bad. It's really so awful that I really can't look at this game and say it's a good game. I don't think it's a good game. I think it's a well-made game, and I think it was made with love. Kojima's love for his fans and wanting for them to be satisfied and get a happy ending. But there's some really terrible parts of this game. The story is awful. It ruins if you play this game and then play these 3 games, Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3, there's a chance it will ruin it for you because of the use of certain characters for certain things, certain answers about the series. In particular, doesn't make any sense. They just choose. They didn't have any characters to make the Patriots, so they're like, okay, let's make these lovable. It's not a good game. I'm not a fan of it. I know that people like it, and it's critically acclaimed, but I don't like it. It's a D tier game for me. I'm sorry. Metal Gear Solid Touch. I have not played this game. It was a mobile game released after the release of Metal Gear Solid 4 for fucking something. I don't know, whatever mobile phones were out then. I haven't played it, so it's gonna stay there. I'm not gonna rank it because why would I? Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Peace Walker is it's an interesting game. The story, I think it's a really great continuation of Metal Gear Solid 3. It takes Naked Snake's character, or now he is a big boss, takes his character and develops it into what we see him as in Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2. It also introduces a lot of new, really great characters like Huey Emmerich, who's a piece of shit, but the fact that everyone hates him so much proves that he's a great character. And Kazuhiro Miller, well, who is in Metal Gear Solid, but not really. His character is not really fleshed out at all, and it's just. And the setup of that character becomes even better after playing 5. So the characters and I think a lot of the story are definitely a highlight of Peace Walker. But the gameplay, it's a mission-based game because it was a handheld game. So every mission is just you go back to Mother Base, which is your HQ, and choose a mission and go out to it. It's not really a continuous experience like the rest of the Metal Gear series. And Fultoning is a thing, you know. I'm not a fan of Peace Walker. It's a good game. It's better than Metal Gear Solid 4, but I don't think it's a fantastic game. So I'm gonna definitely give that a C. It's not as good as Twin Snakes or the original. It's better than the original Metal Gear, but it's not as good as Twin Snakes. Metal Gear Rising. Metal Gear Rising has become kind of a contentious subject in the Metal Gear fandom because it's recently blown up in like the mainstream. People are playing it everywhere. There's a bunch of really not funny memes about it. It was not developed by Hideo Kojima. It was originally going to be as just Metal Gear Rising, but then Platinum Games, the studio that made Bayonetta, overtook it and made a Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. It's a Japanese action game. I think it really is one of the best games in the Metal Gear series, which is a controversial opinion, but it's just a lot of fun. It's a phenomenal game. The story is, like I said before, without Hideo Kojima's involvement, shit gets really wacky. And this is definitely the best example of that. All of the characters in Metal Gear Rising are so phenomenal that every single one of them has become iconic in their own right, even outside of the Metal Gear series, especially Armstrong and Raiden themselves, and just Jetstream Sam. The level design is amazing. The controls are really phenomenal because it's Platinum Games. They know how to make a fun combat system. There really isn't a lot wrong with this game. It's one of the best. It doesn't involve Kojima, but they nail his style, just I think, in a way that's really commendable. So I'm gonna give an A. It's not as good as Metal Gear 2, but it's a really great game. Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes is gonna be hard to rank because it's a good game, of course, but it is a game that was released for like $30 or something insane like that. And the game is like 3 hours long, total. If you want to do all of the content, 100% the entire game, it's 3 hours. It was never intended to be a full game. It was supposed to be a demo and a prequel to Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, which is the real Metal Gear Solid 5. So that's definitely going to take it down a few ranks, just because you can't really have a game like that and sell it for full price. But looking besides that, it has a super unique style compared to the rest of the Metal Gear games. It's like, well, it all takes place on fucking Guantanamo Bay, which is a little bit weird because it's a real place where there was real prisoners held, but now they have spooky viruses. And it continues on Metal Gear Peace Walker with characters like Paz and Chico and, you know, all these characters. It's fun. There's really not enough content for this to be a full price game. I gotta put it in D just because it's unacceptable. You know, the amount of content in this game. It's really not good. And I don't think it's fair at all. As a game, it's okay, but as a full price game, it's not. The last game that matters in the series is Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. This definitely has the most interesting development cycle out of any of the games. Throughout the process of making this game, Konami was also in the process of firing Hideo Kojima. They removed his name from the box art, they cut off a bunch of his development, they didn't let him spend any more money on the game. So it's an unfinished game, inherently. However, it was released, so I have to rank it like that, like as it is. I'm a fan of Metal Gear Solid 5: Phantom Pain. The story is the worst out of the series, but that's not because it's bad, it's just because it doesn't exist. There isn't a lot of story in this game. But the gameplay, the Fox engine is really great. It's an open world stealth game, which sounds like it doesn't work, but it really does. It's mission based like Peace Walker, except instead of, you know, you just being sent to random places, it's one world. So you can go around and do missions rather than just like choose a mission, go to it, go back, choose it again. You can just go around the world and do various side ops and missions. But it would the second chapter, which was released about a year after the original game, is really just not acceptable. It's not finished. It ends in a cliffhanger that will never be resolved. And Kojima just wasn't able to make the game that he wanted to. Even with what he did make, there's a lot of flaws there, particularly in the story that is there, and the online parts. A lot of the missions are shit. And Ocelot, I feel like Ocelot's character in this game does not make any sense. Also, Quiet is there. I don't think Quiet is a good character at all. She's sexualized just for being sexualized. That's the only reason she's sexualized, is because they want her to be sexualized. She doesn't have any character related to it like Eva in Metal Gear Solid 3, or Sniper Wolf in Metal Gear Solid. But, I mean, I have fun playing this game whenever I play it. It's a good game, inherently, but it really messes up in a lot of categories, so I'm giving it a B. It goes above VR missions, though. So, that is my Metal Gear tier list. If you didn't like it, comment something angry and mean to me in the comments. If you did like it, comment something nice. That's it. Thank you.